Hello and welcome to a Team Moray Robotics event recap. On February 14th, I competed at Motorama with my ant-weight combat robot, Moray. So Motorama is a huge motorsports show that happens once a year in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it takes place at the Harrisburg Farm Show Complex. They have all sorts of events like motocross, RC car racing, and car shows, but of course I was there for the pretzels. They also happen to host one of the biggest combat robot events on the East Coast, featuring fairy-weight, ant-weight, beetle-weight, hobby-weight, and featherweight combat robots, in addition to the These Robots Suck class. Many great robots fight at Motorama, so I figured I may as well bring some robots with me while I drove 3 hours to eat pretzels. Before I talk about the robots, I'll say that this was my second time at Motorama. However, last year I was only a spectator, so this was my first time as a competitor. Since the only other event I've competed at was Rabid, Motorama was certainly a new experience being so much larger. I had a great time competing and the event ran pretty smoothly despite a late start. I would recommend competing or just going as a spectator if you can. Motorama runs 5 weight classes excluding the suck bots, but the 1 pound ant weights and the 150 gram fairy weights compete on Friday before the event is open to spectators. Friday's the day when the other events are all getting set up. I brought my ant-weight Moray coming off of a satisfying Rabid performance in November, and I also made a TPU chassis for my dad for Christmas, and he helped design attachments that he wanted to go on it. His robot's a 1 pound lifter named Kickserve, and he competed for the first time. There was one more robot that I brought which fought on Saturday, but you'll have to wait for a separate video to see that. I'm not going to do a full recap of how Kickserve did, but I will put the fights out as individual videos like I do with all my fights. Kickserve went 0-2 and didn't perform particularly well in its fights, but it lasted the full 2 minutes in both of its matches, including a fight against Nate Franklin, and it got a few good lifts in. This was encouraging because Moray and Kickserve use the same drive setup, so if Kickserve could survive the entire fight, then Moray would also have a good chance. As for changes to Moray, I made the chassis less tall to save on weight, which gave me weight for better attachments. I also changed the drive motor mounting setup so it would hopefully be much more durable than the previous event. Another big change is the addition of wheel guards. All of Moray's previous losses came from getting hit on the wheel hub, but with wheel guards, Moray's drive system should be much more reliable. I also printed TPU hubs this time and soldered the motor leads to the ESCs. The last thing I did is I coated the wheels in rubber cement to hopefully increase the amount of traction they could get. Moray's first opponent was Something Else. And no, I'm not insulting my opponent, the robot was named Something Else. It's a very tall robot with a small horizontal spinner using one of the FingerTech discs. I thought I remembered seeing this design available as a kit robot, but now when I look for it I can't really find it, so maybe it is custom. I felt pretty good about my chances going into this one because this was Something Else's first event, and I had made a new thick TPU wedge for Moray. It was designed to absorb the hits from horizontal spinners and protect the internals even if it got chewed up. For the whole event I ran the big titanium disc, so I thought that I could deliver some big hits even if we went weapon on weapon. When the fight starts, I try to line up a good hit. I miss and Something Else rips into Moray's wheel guard. I'm able to avoid any of my opponent's attacks, but I don't quite feed Something Else into the disc enough. After a short period of time, Moray rams Something Else into the wall and connects with its spinner, splitting Something Else open. I get a great hit on the back corner and flip my opponent upside down, as well as take a nice chunk out of the plastic. Something Else is a very tall robot, so Moray had some trouble getting it to ride up the wedge, but I find an angle on the side and the disc tears through the frame. Then we go weapon to weapon, and as I had hoped, Moray wins the exchange and fully splits Something Else open, exposing the battery and ending the fight. Moray would move on in the winner's bracket now. The damage to Moray was very minimal, with a slight rip in the right wheel guard and a gouge where Something Else's spinner had hit the wedge. My next opponent was Dink, a hammer saw. That means it has a spinning blade on an arm that it swings down onto its opponents to hopefully break through their top plate and damage the internals. I had seen Dink fight before this event, so I knew that it would be a very tough matchup for me. For this one, I put the new TPU forks on. I knew I couldn't outreach Dink, but I thought it might make Moray harder to scoop up and pin. More importantly, I tried a new top armor setup where I took the usual 2mm thick carbon fiber top plate and layered some washers on top of that where each screw was. Then I put a second 1mm thick top plate on top of that to create an air gap in between the two tops. My hope was that Dink would break through the first top plate but not be able to make it through the second one. I tried to get to the side of Dink at the start of the fight, but as expected, his forks had a lot more reach and he was able to pin Moray. He didn't have an angle for a hit, so he pushed Moray over to the other wall and lined up a hit. This strike actually hit Moray's exposed weapon motor, but somehow it keeps spinning. Dink has to release the pin and Moray shaves some sparks off of its forks. Our forks get tangled and it doesn't allow Dink to line up a hit until Moray is pushed into the wall. Fortunately, he hits Moray's metal disc and doesn't do any real damage, but the disc was unfortunately stopped by being pushed into. Here I definitely felt like something was wrong with the weapon after the first direct hit to the motor, but it quickly comes back to life. Moray gets flipped but avoids being hit. Then the forks get stuck again, with neither bot being able to land a hit. Moray was being easily overpowered by Dink's superior drive system, until Moray's spinner connects with one of Dink's forks and knocks the two robots apart. After this exchange, Moray's right side drive went down due to a solder joint disconnecting. Then Dink lands its first hit to the top plate, and as I had hoped, only damages the top one and didn't get through to the second layer. I take another hit in the corner before the release. I was struggling to do much of anything here because of Dink's long forks and the drive failures Moray was having. Moray takes another good hit, but the top armor continues to work perfectly. Dink brings the arm down, and the disc only hits the foam wheel, tearing it slightly. In the final few seconds of the fight, Moray grinds a few more sparks off of Dink's forks. This was a very dominant victory for Dink, and a very well-deserved win. It's clearly such a well-built robot. Even though I clearly lost, I was actually very pleased with the fight overall. The top armor couldn't have worked better because not a single one of Dink's hits even scratched the lower top plate. It's really funny, but on the first hit to the top plate, the hammer saw somehow only grazed the plastic clip that holds Moray's blue LED on and pushed the light inside of the robot. It's so funny to me that that's the only bit of damage that the lower layer took. The weapon motor still spun the whole fight, but it's clearly damaged and doesn't work properly anymore. The only damage that really affected my performance in this fight was the solder joint breaking between the right side drive motor and the ESC. I plan on fixing this for the next event by using JST connectors. Dink actually did take a little bit of damage though, because the tip of the arm was ripped. This happened in this hit here where Dink fires the arm straight into Moray's spinner. And I also got this team sticker from Dink. Moray was now in the elimination bracket, meaning I would be out if I lost another fight. My next opponent was Impala, a very cool wedge-shaped robot with a vertical spinning bar and little forks lining the front of the robot. What I like so much about the robot is that there's a lot of metal on it, which has become much less common as people tend to use more 3D printed parts and carbon fiber. I would keep the forks on for this fight because they would give Moray more reach than Impala. Despite not taking much damage from the Dink fight, I just barely got the robot ready in time for my next battle. I was really scrambling to put it back together in time, and I made it to the box right at the last second. The fight begins with both bots trying to get an angle, and Moray's forks outreach Impala's and allow Moray to grind away at the corner with his vertical spinner. This is probably the only place where this sound is incredibly pleasing to hear. Impala's right corner already had a bit taken out of it, and the far right fork was already somewhat bent, but Moray definitely did some amount of damage here. Again, Moray's superior reach wins in exchange. Impala lands a glancing blow to Moray's wheel guard, which in the past might have hit the wheel hub. I gain the upper hand again with the forks and bully my opponent into the corner while grinding with the spinner. Moray's spinner finally gets some good bite and throws the robots away from each other. Impala continues to be stopped by Moray's reach advantage, but the shape of Impala made it hard for Moray to get any real good hits. This fight was extremely tense and I was afraid I would slip up and the fight could turn at any moment, eliminating Moray. Moray throws some sparks with another small hit. I continue to keep the front pointed at Impala, not allowing him to do much. Impala gets around to the back of Moray but isn't able to land much of a hit. I finally get to the other front corner of Impala, but Moray's disc does not make any contact with the chassis. A few more sparks and grinding hits and the fight goes the full 2 minutes. Moray was awarded the victory and would be moving on in the bracket. Out of all the fights I've had with Moray so far, this is my favorite in the moment because I was able to consistently outdrive Impala and I was tense the whole time while driving. I was so worried I would make a mistake and allow my opponent to get a hit in, but I kept driving really well. Moray took no real damage, but managed to do a little bit of damage to Impala. My spinner took some chunks out of the front right corner, but most notably, bent the front right fork. The Impala builders let me keep the damaged fork, and you can see the material that was removed, as well as a big crack. It was already bent a bit at the start of the fight, but I definitely bent it a bit more. Also, the Impala builders knew about my videos, and 2 other people recognized Moray from YouTube, so that's pretty cool. I didn't need to change anything for the next fight because I would be fighting Raptor. Raptor was a big vertical spinner with 2 blades mounted onto 1 hub, and it lost its first fight and then moved on in the tournament due to 2 forfeits, so it didn't have much battle experience. The fight starts with both robots lining up a hit, and Moray getting the upper hand in the corner. Moray shows its reach advantage again with its long TPU forks, before Raptor flips Moray with a hit to the wheel guard. The wheel guard does its job and protects the drive from taking any damage. You can see Raptor struggle to drive with the gyroscopic force of its spinner, but it lands another hit on Moray. Then it flips itself over, and its wheels can't touch the floor when the weapon comes to a stop. This means I could have ended the fight here, but I wanted to keep it going, so I hit Raptor back upright. The bots land some small hits in the corner. Moray gets flipped again and self-rights. Both robots had a hard time getting hits because Raptor had gyro issues, and Moray was pulling to the right a lot. I think this is a combination of things that caused this problem. I flip Raptor, but it self-rights on the wall. We go weapon to weapon and make some pretty sparks that'll look great in the thumbnail for this fight, and then Moray picks up a new sticker. I just barely clipped the back of Raptor, and at this point Moray's drive was pretty bad. Raptor flips Moray twice and removes my new sticker. This fight was extremely close, and I really wanted to deliver a hit right before the end, and fortunately I land a hard hit in the corner. Raptor gets a small pop, and I desperately try to land one last hit with my subpar drive system, but the time runs out, sending the fight to the judges. I really didn't know who won that.
I don't know who won that.
The judges ended up giving it to Raptor, which meant that Moray was eliminated from the competition. I can't say this was the wrong call because the fight was just that close. I've watched this fight many times now, and I still can't really decide who I think should have won. Sometimes I think Moray should have taken it, and sometimes I think Raptor was the right decision. Neither robot really took any damage. Moray's wheel guards took some hits, but they held up great. The drive problems were probably due to 2 issues. The rubber cement I put on the wheels allows Moray to drive great at the beginning of a fight, but the adhesive quickly picks up so much debris from the floor that I end up with worse traction than I would have without the rubber cement. But the main issue is probably the new TPU hubs, which I think were sliding around too much. For the next event, I superglued the shaft collars to the hubs, so this issue should be fixed. I was now out of the tournament, but there was still time in between tournament fights for grudge matches, so I asked the people from Sad Frog Robotics if they were up for a grudge match with one of their ant weights. They agreed, but didn't have any ants ready in time, so they decided to put a fairy weight in the box instead. For scale, Moray weighs a little under 1 pound, which is about 450 grams. A fairy weight weighs only up to 150 grams, so everyone knew this would be more of a spectacle than a fight. The fairy was Lord of the Flies, a 4-wheel drive vertical spinner. When the fight starts, Lord of the Flies is down a side of drive, and Moray still had some drive issues going on too. I land 2 small hits on Lord of the Flies. Then Moray perfectly pops the tread off one of their wheels. I keep things going and bounce Lord of the Flies around. Then I toss it through the air. Moray's disc digs straight into the chassis, and you can see the joy on the builders' faces as their tiny little robot gets ripped into by a robot more than twice the size of it. The fight ends when Moray digs in some more and tears the battery straight out. I wasn't particularly happy with how this fight went, because the drive problems were just awful in this one, and it made it really hard to line up hits. Fortunately, I have plans to fix that for the next event, which will be macro on March 15th. Overall, I'm very pleased with how I did at Motorama. Another 2-2 record is respectable, and Impala is probably the best robot I've beat so far. Moray will continue to improve, and I have another video about Motorama coming soon. Thank you for watching. Oh, and I had the honor and privilege of meeting Tony Clifton, international superstar. That's what it says on his business card.